From the Toronto Star, I'm Raji Mudder, and this matters. Facebook is getting poked by a huge advertising boycott for the month of July. It features hundreds of companies, including Unilever, Coca-Cola, Lululemon, and many more. Canada's Big Five banks have now all signed on to the Stop Hate for Profit campaign, which was started by a number of civil rights organizations, including the Anti-Defamation League and the NAACP, to put pressure on the company to take steps to curb hate speech, fight misinformation, and threats of violence on the platform. Part of the larger goal is for Facebook to reflect on its impact on society, which, along with its other social networks like Instagram or messaging app WhatsApp, has done some amazing things to connect almost 3 billion people around the world. It's also played a role in genocide in Myanmar, had to weather the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and was used to meddle in the 2016 US elections. Facebook has been under pressure to make changes for a long time. Will this boycott have any effect? To discuss this, today we are joined by Stephen Levy, who is a legendary technology journalist who is currently editor-at-large at Wired, where he has written since its inception. He is also the author of a number of books, including Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution, and his most recent book, Facebook, The Inside Story. It is a real pleasure to have you on This Matters. Thank you so much for taking the time.
No, it's my pleasure.
So the news we want to talk about right now is this growing Stop Hate for Profit ad boycott that has some of the biggest companies in the world like Unilever, Coca-Cola. What do you think about this movement and what they're trying to do to affect Facebook's bottom line?
Well, I think it's fascinating. After years of propping up Facebook and putting a huge share of their digital advertising and growing with Facebook in the digital advertising world, some of these huge companies are now expressing concern about the content on Facebook. And I don't think that the companies themselves are so much worried about it, but worried that the perception of Facebook generally is one where toxic content is circulated. So it shows how the pressure from Facebook from all sides, from the public, from media, and from Facebook's own workplace is all combining to cause these problems for the company.
Do you think it'll have any effect? One of the things that I've read is that, the top 100 largest companies in the US only account for about 6% of Facebook's actual revenue. And obviously, most of their advertising comes from smaller businesses. Basically, if this has an effect, it has to grow much larger, people believe. What do you think about that?
I think it does have an effect. I think these companies, percentage-wise, might not be the majority of advertising. It's certainly ones that Facebook pays a lot of attention to. They have a big advertising council of some of the top marketing officers of these big companies like Unilever and Procter & Gamble. And that's where the techniques that drive Facebook advertising really get perfected. So I feel that these companies set an example for the whole market. And if they're out of Facebook for good, that's going to have an effect. That said, I don't think they're going to leave Facebook for good. I think they found Facebook to be really useful for them. There's not many places to go when you look at really effective digital advertising between Facebook and Google. You've got the bulk of the market. So I think they want to send a message here and hope that Facebook improves so they can return and everyone could be happy again.
You just published your book, Facebook, The Inside Story, in February. You basically spent 3 years trying to understand Facebook now. You got remarkable access. And I think the thing that most interesting when you read this book is despite, a user base of 2.6 billion people, it really still comes down to one person, Mark Zuckerberg. And one of the lines that you have is, it's all about his ability to adapt or in some ways refuse to adapt in the most challenging of circumstances. Where do you think he is right now? He did a statement on Friday saying that they were going to make changes, but this is the latest in a long line of statements that they've made. Do you think this is the thing that actually, where they do start to change things?
That's right. Well, besides being someone who has always had complete control over Facebook. And in the book, I describe how that happens. And in a way, he has to thank Sean Parker for that, who was a president of Facebook early on. And if you saw the movie, the guy Justin Timberlake played. And the real life Sean Parker was a little different than that, but he did let Zuckerberg know that it was important to keep total control of his company. He showed him how to do that. Zuckerberg's always been a person who likes control. I checked his very early days. He loved the kinds of games you can control the universe, and now he controls the universe of Facebook. That said, he will be someone who do what he wants to do because he thinks it'll ultimately work out and people will see things his way, but he can read tea leaves. He can read data. And he's not going to take Facebook down to hold on to a principle. Right now, he's desperately trying to look at these tweaks. Like last week, he said, okay, now we're going to put these warning labels, in essence, on toxic content by heads of state, namely Donald Trump. That's not enough. People want more from that. They want something a little more fundamental. And if he feels that he can't get away with these tweaks, I think he'll bend to that because he's looking out for his company in the long term.
You mentioned something that I really wanted to touch upon, because obviously you had so much access and know about the internal cultures of these giant tech companies. How much is the internal conflict within Facebook and from his employees? Is that important? On what level will you put that on in terms of, he's getting a lot of pressure from them. They wanted them to act on the hate speech and disinformation as well. And yet, as you put it, he's a wartime president now.
That's what he told his executives, that he's read this blog, and it was later a book by venture capitalist Ben Horowitz talking about peacetime CEOs and wartime CEOs. The joke is that he was always a wartime CEO. He always talks to his employees, pinpointing who the enemy is at a given time. In recent years, the enemy isn't just other companies, it's regulators, it's critics of the general public increasingly. But I think, to your question, I think the employee resistance is more important than the ad boycott. As I said before, the advertisers, they don't have many places to go to get these results that Facebook delivers to them, but the employees have places to go. It really is crucial to Mark Zuckerberg to recruit and retain the best talent, because his plan is to dominate not just today, but years from now. 5 years ago, he bought a virtual reality company because he thought that 10 years from then, that would be the next big platform. So in the long term, he really needs the top technical talent, the best engineers, the best AI people in order to take Facebook where it wants to go. If these people think Facebook isn't a great place to work, they have other options. There's plenty of other places that will pay them a lot of money, like Amazon and Google, or they could do a great startup. So he is threatened by employees losing the Facebook dream.
There are a ton of great things in your book. And one of the things that I find really interesting is obviously it started on a trip to Nigeria where there was sort of peak Facebook, as you call it. And then, of course, we've been living through this sort of tech backlash the last couple of years. I think Sheryl Sandberg in your book is the one that actually feels that. Regarding that tech backlash, do you think that what's happening now is something that's been roiling from that, or is this different with the explosion of Black Lives Matter and social justice clauses and even this pandemic that has kept us all cooped up?
Well, no, this comes on top of 3 years of troubles at Facebook. The 2016 election just flipped the bid at Facebook. You mentioned I went to Nigeria with Mark Zuckerberg. It was the first thing I did in the book. And at that point, even though Facebook had a lot of problems over the years, it still was seen as one of the golden examples of the tech world. And Zuckerberg himself was seen as this exemplar of a young founder building a giant company and creating wealth for a lot of people and helping push the whole industry forward. But after the election, people started worrying about the effects of the content on Facebook, how it could be manipulated. And then it was one scandal after another, culminating in the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where the data of millions fell into the hands of right-wing political operation. This now comes on top of that. Facebook never really won back the trust that's been its mission for the last couple of years. They've done a lot of things, they've made a lot of investments, but they haven't turned around and changed public perception. So now, when people are looking even more closely at the content everywhere, Facebook obviously is not going to look good because it never really fixed the problems that people have with it.
I think one of the things that you also do is you look back at Facebook's history and find that a lot of its problems are really from its foundational makeup. Cambridge Analytica started from the fact that, they didn't really care about people's privacy all that much in the beginning. I think the other thing right now is that Zuckerberg at least you said it, he has this idea that information and ideas should be free. Now, it's one of these things. Do you think he actually believes that to be true, or is it just really a great business motive?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. I think even though we've talked to Zuckerberg about the hacker spirit and the whole information being free and open source, which Facebook does like the open source movement, but I think the way he sees it is that he wants the people to be able to express themselves freely on Facebook and express themselves up to the line where it is something that degrades the experience for other people. Now, where he draws the line is different from where a lot of people are drawing the line. And he's learning that. So he keeps having to move the line. So at one point, the line included, for instance, anti-vax content. When that first started coming up, people were complaining about that in the early part of the 2014, 2015. Facebook ignored those complaints. They figured, well, this is what people wanted to say. We're not going to get involved in that. And then later, they realized that was a bad look. They had to include that among the small number of categories where they would ban that kind of content. And we've seen that play again and again and again. Right now, Facebook, of course, doesn't like hate speech. They say they're banning hate speech, and they don't do a perfect job at it. But what they define as hate speech comes under other scrutiny. And maybe some people feel that hate speech is broader than what Facebook is acting against. And now people are saying, what about divisive content? What about content that divides us? That you see a lot of that on Facebook. You look at the top articles, and it's stuff that doesn't bring people together. It's not kumbaya stuff, but it's stuff that pits one group against another. Generally, the top articles in a given day are conservative articles that degrade the nature of discourse. And Facebook says, well, gee, you want us to censor that or keep that down? And people, by and large, say, well, yeah, we don't want this platform, which is the dominant social platform in the world, to be, by and large, a force to divide us. And that's a tough problem for Facebook to handle.
That's my next question. How do they fix this? I mean, this is one of these things where they've talked about labeling. Other platforms are trying to do that right now. I mean, there was this recent investigation at popular.info about how a massive alt-right-wing content farm, the way that they do things is that they just basically they write about events, but the events are always like 3 years later. So one solution I'm hearing is you need labels that actually date when the events are. And of course, then the other thing, which Facebook does some, but does it require a lot more content moderation? Are these the only fixes?
I don't have a simple answer for that, but what I do have is an explanation about why it's so hard to fix. And that's really what I wound up doing in the book, was really explaining how Facebook and Zuckerberg dug themselves into this hole. It was their pursuit of growth and their way to get more users and to keep users once they signed up and to keep them using it more, that led them to adopt algorithms and bake them deep into the system where a lot of engagement would make content more popular. And it just so turns out the bad stuff, negative stuff that makes your blood boil is in that category. So it's pretty hard when you bake that stuff into your product to then turn around and say, we better rethink that. It's going to take some deep surgery and rearranging for that to happen. And I think probably we're now just waiting to see at what point Zuckerberg realizes that he has to go down and make those deep changes to Facebook in order to finally placate his critics.
I think one of the best things that the book is how you show his ambition and this search for engagement and growth above all else. Is that surgery so hard now? They have 2.6 billion people. I do think it's too big to fail now. Am I wrong?
Well, no. In technology, nothing's too big to fail because things move. The trick for Zuckerberg is to stay ahead of the next paradigm shift. So I'd say in the short term, you're right. You've got just about 3 billion people. If you count all the different franchises there, you add up all the different people, you don't double count them, of Instagram and WhatsApp and Facebook's main app. And that's 3 billion people. It's a big chunk of the world. He doesn't have China, of course. And if he had that, he'd probably have the majority of the world. But something else comes along that makes people use different kind of technology. And that's the moment where a competitor can come in and win people away from him. Right now, I'm sure he goes to bed every night thinking, what am I going to do about TikTok? Because a lot of people are spending time on TikTok, younger people. And he can't buy TikTok, A, because it's a company owned by the Chinese, and B, even if it was a company that he could buy, regulators wouldn't let him do it at this point because they're under great antitrust scrutiny. I think ultimately these things can be challenged. We're seeing it now. Despite the fact that he can control anything he wants at Facebook, despite all the power they have, he's running scared because of this sort of triple threat of regulators and legislators, of advertisers, and his own workforce pushing back on him. So he's had to make these changes.
We've talked about the advertisers, we've talked about the employees. You mentioned the regulators again. How much of a threat is that?
Well, I don't think in the short term it's a giant threat. Really, the end game that they want is to peel off these other properties we mentioned, Instagram and WhatsApp. Facebook has, I think, 4 of the social networks in the world that have more than 1 billion people. And I think you can use 2 hands and still have some fingers left over when you count how many are in the world. And there's 4 of them that Facebook has. If you include Messenger, which they peeled off from the rest of the company. If that happened, it would take many years. It would be challenged. It would depend on who the president is in 2026. If it was a friendly president, like you look at what happened to Microsoft, even a ruling that Facebook has to peel these companies off might be rolled back. I think the other thing would be is if Facebook itself looked at it and Zuckerberg looked at it and thought, you know what, I'd rather be in charge of Instagram than the main Facebook. That's more interesting. And I think it would be a more valuable company if you added the values of these companies when they split up, because when you split up these companies, we saw this in the Bell breakup, you get companies that when you total them up are worth more. Instagram itself might grow up to be something that's as valuable as Facebook is now.
You've written books about Google and Apple before. What is it that strikes you different about Facebook? Is it the fact that they still have their founder?
Well, until recently, Google had its founder. Larry and Sergey just left really less than a year ago. But I think what's different about Facebook is that it really was characterized by the dominance of this founder and the way that he ran the company and put his imprint on it, and the uniqueness of its mission, which is to connect everyone in the world. That had never been done. That's why I wanted to write the book. The day Mark Zuckerberg posted that 1 billion people had been on Facebook in that last 24 hours, he posted that in late August 2015. I realized that this had never been done before. What does this mean, and what are the implications? And, I set out to do a book about it. Almost a year to the day after that, I was off to Africa with Zuckerberg, and I found that these complications were way more than even Facebook thought they'd be.
I think we're all going to be watching. This is one of those things, the way the feed works, I think most people won't even notice that these ad companies are not going to be there. Is that fair to say?
Some people might be happy if they have fewer ads.
That's a good point. This has been fabulous for us. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you think that we should know?
I think you have to look at the Facebook's woes in the context of what's called the techlash. The people are really concerned about the power, not just of Facebook, though Facebook is the poster child of this pushback against big tech companies, but the power that these other companies have, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft even, which incidentally joined the boycott, and Google. These companies have tremendous power over us. And in an era of COVID where we're indoors more, relying more on the online world, that's even more power. So I think it's a healthy thing to worry about these companies, even though some people, who were the early chroniclers of this movement, like me, started out more optimistic. I think it's fair to say we have to look a little more critically about the whole industry now.
That was fabulous for us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Stephen Levy is editor-at-large at Wired Magazine. Since recording this interview, there has been some further reporting on this story, with the site The Information obtaining a leaked transcript of remarks from Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg to employees saying, "My guess is that all these advertisers will be back on the platform soon enough." That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Rajin Buddher, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etisaz. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Foso. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.